The hum of the refrigerator was the baseline rhythm of my life. It was a constant, steady companion in the quiet moments after my 7-year-old daughter, Lily, went to bed. For the past 3 years, since her diagnosis with celiac disease, that hum was a sound of safety. It meant the specially milled flours, the certified gluten-free breads, and the carefully prepared meals were being kept safe for my little girl. Our life was a meticulous dance of label reading, cross-contamination prevention, and home-cooked meals. It wasn't easy, but seeing Lily transform from a sickly, lethargic child into a vibrant, energetic one was worth every single sacrifice. Our divorce had been amicable enough. Mark and I had simply grown apart. He was a good father, if a bit hands-off, and he'd never questioned the doctor's orders. He saw the evidence with his own eyes: Lily's rosy cheeks, her bright laughter, her ability to finally keep up with her friends at the park. He'd seen the before, the endless nights of stomach cramps, the rashes, the weight loss that had terrified us both. He understood the stakes. Or so I thought. Everything changed with Jessica. She was Mark's new girlfriend, a woman who seemed to be sculpted from Instagram filters and fleeting wellness trends. She was all sharp angles and confident opinions. The first time I met her, when she and Mark came to pick up Lily, she eyed the cooler bag I'd packed with a dismissive smirk. It was filled with Lily's gluten-free snacks, a juice box, and a slice of homemade GF chocolate cake. "That's a lot of fuss for a playdate," Jessica commented, her voice light but laced with judgment. I forced a tight smile. "It's not a fuss, it's her medicine. Lily has celiac disease." "Oh, right," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "The gluten thing. So trendy these days. My cousin went gluten-free for a month. Said it did wonders for her skin, but she couldn't live without real pasta." My blood ran cold. The casual equation of a serious autoimmune disorder with a lifestyle fad was a red flag the size of a billboard. "It's not a trend for Lily," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "It's a medical necessity. Even a crumb of gluten can make her severely ill." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Honey, Sarah knows what she's doing." But his defense was weak, colored by the desire to appease his new partner. Over the next few weeks, the whispers of doubt grew louder. Mark started calling me, questioning the rigidity of the diet. "Jess was just saying, maybe you're being a little over the top, Sarah. Kids eat dirt. A little bit of bread can't be that bad, can it?" "Yes, Mark, it can," I'd argue, my frustration mounting. "Her doctor explained this to both of us. Her immune system attacks her own intestines. This isn't an allergy, it's an autoimmune disease." I know," he'd say placatingly. "But you're so controlling about it. Jessica thinks you're using it to keep a leash on me and Lily." The word controlling was a dagger. I wasn't controlling, I was protecting. I was the one who held Lily's hair back while she vomited. I was the one who researched every ingredient and called manufacturers. I was the one who had to explain to a crying child why she couldn't have the same birthday cake as everyone else. The dread culminated the Friday before Lily's first full weekend with Mark and Jessica. I packed her bag with military precision: gluten-free pasta, her favorite chicken nuggets, bread for toast, cookies, even a small bag of her own flour in case they wanted to make pancakes. I wrote down detailed instructions, highlighting the dangers of shared toasters and cutting boards. Mark picked her up, barely glancing at the 2 heavy bags of food. "Honestly, Sarah, we do have grocery stores where I live," he said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Jessica stood behind him, arms crossed, a look of triumph on her face. That weekend was the longest of my life. I called Saturday evening to say goodnight. Lily's voice was faint. "Hi, Mommy." "Hi, sweet pea. Are you having fun with Daddy?" "Yes. We had pizza for dinner." My heart stopped. "Pizza? Did Daddy use the special pizza base I packed?" There was a pause. I could hear Jessica's voice murmuring in the background. "Daddy and Jess said their pizza was better." "It was yummy, Mommy. But my tummy hurts a little." A tidal wave of ice and fire washed over me. "Okay, baby," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "Just tell Daddy to give you a big hug for me. I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up the phone, my hand shaking so hard I dropped it on the floor. They had done it. They had ignored every warning, dismissed every plea, and fed my daughter poison. And this was only the beginning. Lily came home on Sunday evening looking like a ghost. The vibrant color in her cheeks was gone, replaced by a pasty, gray pallor. Dark circles, like faint bruises, pooled under her eyes. She moved slowly, her usual bouncy energy completely extinguished. She walked into the house, dropped her backpack, and curled up on the sofa without a word, pulling a blanket over her head. "Lily, honey? Are you okay?" I asked, kneeling beside her. She shook her head from under the blanket, a small, muffled whimper escaping. My fear, which had been simmering for 48 hours, boiled over into a cold, hard certainty. I called Mark immediately. He answered on the third ring, his voice breezy. "Hey, she get home okay? What did you feed her, Mark?" I asked, skipping any preamble. My voice was low and dangerous. "Whoa, what's with the tone?" "We fed her food, Sarah. You know, the stuff people eat. Don't play games with me. Lily told me you had pizza. Was it gluten-free?" There was a telling silence on the other end. I heard Jessica whisper, "Just tell her it was. She's being crazy." Mark's voice came back, laced with false bravado. "Of course it was. We're not stupid." "You're a liar," I whispered. "She's sick, Mark. She's really sick." "Oh, for God's sake, she's probably just tired. You've got her so wound up about this food thing, you're probably giving her anxiety. Jessica says it's likely psychosomatic." Psychosomatic. The word hung in the air, an insult of such profound ignorance it stole my breath. Before I could respond, Jessica's sharp voice cut in. "Listen, Sarah. I get that this is your little project, but you need to relax. We gave her a normal, happy weekend with normal food. A little bit of real bread isn't going to kill her. You're being hysterical. You have no idea what you're talking about," I ceded. "You're not a doctor. You're not her mother. You put my child in harm's way because of your arrogant, misinformed opinions." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. The next 24 hours were a descent into hell. Lily's stomach ache intensified into agonizing cramps that made her scream. Then came the vomiting, violent and relentless. She was too weak to even make it to the bathroom, and I spent the night changing her bedding, wiping her feverish forehead, and trying to get her to sip water. The distinct, blister-like rash of dermatitis herpetiformis, her telltale celiac symptom, began to bloom across her elbows and knees. By morning, she was completely dehydrated and frighteningly lethargic. Her eyes wouldn't focus on me. I scooped her into my arms, her body feeling frail and weightless, and rushed her to the emergency room. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital, the doctors and nurses moved with an urgency that confirmed my worst fears. They hooked her up to N4 for fluids and electrolytes and drew blood. The on-call pediatrician, a kind woman with weary eyes, listened intently as I recounted the weekend, my voice cracking with a mixture of rage and grief. "We're seeing a severe autoimmune response," she confirmed a few hours later, looking at the initial blood work. "Her celiac antibodies are through the roof. This is consistent with a significant gluten exposure. We're going to have to keep her for a few days to stabilize her." I sat by Lily's hospital bed, watching the clear fluid drip slowly into her arm. She was asleep, her small face peaceful for the first time in days, but she looked so fragile, so broken. This was not a tummy ache. This was not psychosomatic. This was a betrayal of the most fundamental trust a child can have in a parent, the trust that they will keep you safe. Mark and Jessica had not done this out of a single moment of carelessness. It was a deliberate act, born from ego and disrespect. They had decided their opinion was more valid than a doctor's diagnosis and 3 years of lived experience. They had gambled with my daughter's health to prove a point, to undermine me, to dismantle the careful world of safety I had built for her. As I watched my daughter sleep, something inside me hardened. The grief and the fear were still there, but they were now overlaid with a layer of cold, unshakable resolve. This would not happen again. I would not allow them the opportunity to hurt her again. This wasn't a co-parenting disagreement anymore. This was a war for my daughter's well-being, and I was going to fight it with everything I had. Lily's recovery was slow and painful. The physical symptoms began to subside after 3 days in the hospital, but the emotional and psychological damage was deeper. She became fearful of food, even the safe food I prepared for her. She'd push her plate away, her big eyes welling with tears. "Will this make my tummy hurt again, Mommy?" The most heartbreaking moment came one evening as I was tucking her into bed. She looked up at me, her face a mask of confusion and hurt. "Mommy, did Daddy make me sick on purpose?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, a mix of fury at Mark and sorrow for my daughter. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her father chose to believe his new girlfriend over her own well-being? "Oh, sweetie, no," I lied, the words tasting like ash. "Daddy he forgot the rules. But it won't happen again. Mommy will make sure of it." And I meant it. The moment Lily was discharged, my first call was to a family law attorney named Ms. Davies. She was a no-nonsense woman who listened to my story without a hint of surprise, her pen scratching furiously across a legal pad. "This is medical negligence," she stated flatly when I finished. "And his girlfriend's involvement constitutes endangerment. We have a very strong case." She laid out the options. The best course of action was to file for an emergency modification of our custody agreement. We would petition the court to strip Mark of his unsupervised visitation rights. All future visits would have to be supervised by a court-appointed professional until he could prove he understood the severity of Lily's condition and could be trusted to keep her safe. This would involve mandatory educational classes on celiac disease and a probationary period. "He's going to fight it," I said, thinking of Mark's pride and Jessica's manipulative influence. "Let him," Ms. Davies said with a thin smile. "We have hospital records, a doctor's testimony, and a history of your warnings. He has his girlfriend's feelings. I like our odds." The process began. I spent hours documenting everything, old emails where I'd sent Mark articles about celiac disease, screenshots of our recent text message arguments, a detailed timeline of Lily's symptoms, and the final hospital discharge papers that explicitly listed acute flare of celiac disease due to gluten exposure as the cause of admission. When Mark was served the papers, his reaction was explosive. He called me, screaming, "Are you out of your mind, Sarah? You're trying to take my daughter away from me. Over a fucking piece of pizza. You put her in the hospital, Mark." I yelled back, my own composure finally snapping. "She was on N4 because of you. Because you and your girlfriend decided to play doctor. This isn't about taking her away from you, it's about keeping her alive. This is all about control," he spat, the words clearly fed to him by Jessica. "You can't stand that I've moved on and I'm happy, so you're using Lily's illness to punish me. Jessica was right about you from the start. You're vindictive and unstable." The conversation ended with him threatening to get the best lawyer in the city and prove I was an unfit mother suffering from Munchausen by proxy. It was a vile, baseless accusation, but it terrified me. Our first step was a mandatory mediation session. We sat at opposite ends of a long, polished table, our lawyers beside us. Mark and Jessica entered together, a united front of defiance. Jessica wore a crisp, white blazer, looking more like a corporate shark than someone who had recently poisoned a child. She refused to make eye contact with me, instead whispering constantly in Mark's ear. Mark's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, argued that this was a simple co-parenting misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an overly anxious and controlling mother. They claimed the pizza had a cauliflower crust and that Lily must have gotten sick from something else. They painted me as hysterical, a woman unable to let go of her failed marriage. Ms. Davies calmly laid out our evidence. She placed the hospital photos of Lily on the table, pale and listless, with a tube taped to her tiny hand. She presented the doctor's signed statement. She read aloud the text messages where I had begged Mark to be careful. Mark flinched at the photos, but Jessica placed a hand on his arm, her expression hardening. The mediator, a weary-looking man, listened to both sides. "Clearly," he said, looking at Mark, "there has been a serious breakdown in trust. The evidence of medical harm is significant. I suggest you consider the petitioner's request for supervised visitation very seriously, Mr. Evans. Because if this goes before a judge, I suspect the outcome will not be in your favor." Mark's face went white with rage. Jessica's jaw was clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. They refused the proposal outright. "We'll see you in court," Mark's lawyer said, packing his briefcase. As they walked out, I felt a chilling sense of dread. This wasn't going to be a simple legal procedure. They were going to drag my name, my sanity, and my love for my child through the mud. They weren't backing down. They were doubling down. The battle lines were drawn, and I was standing on one side, armed with the truth, while they stood on the other, armed with lies and indignation. The weeks leading up to the court date were a special kind of torture. My life became a whirlwind of legal strategy sessions, evidence gathering, and sleepless nights. Ms. Davies prepped me relentlessly, transforming my kitchen table into a mock courtroom. "They're going to attack your character, Sarah," she warned, her eyes stern over her reading glasses. "They'll call you controlling, obsessive, bitter. They will try to make you angry on the stand. You cannot let them. You must remain calm, factual, and focused on one thing only, Lily's safety." I practiced my testimony until the words felt smooth and worn in my mouth. I relived every painful detail of Lily's illness, every dismissive comment from Mark and Jessica, every pleading phone call. Each repetition was like picking at a scab, but Ms. Davies insisted it was necessary. "The truth is your armor," she'd say. "Wear it well." Meanwhile, I could feel the tendrils of Mark and Jessica's campaign against me reaching into our old social circles. Mutual friends grew distant. I heard whispers that Mark was telling people I was mentally unstable, using Lily as a pawn. Jessica posted vague, passive-aggressive memes on social media about toxic exes and letting go of control. It was a coordinated attack designed to isolate me and discredit me before we even set foot in the courtroom. I didn't know it at the time, but Mark was beginning to unravel. His bravado, fueled by Jessica's outrage, was starting to crack under the weight of legal reality. His lawyer, though slick, was also pragmatic. He had to explain to Mark what losing would actually mean. It wouldn't just be a slap on the wrist. A judge's ruling against him would be a permanent part of his legal record. It would be a formal declaration that he, as a father, was a danger to his own child. The supervised visits weren't just a temporary inconvenience, they were a mark of shame. He'd have to sit in a sterile room while a stranger watched him play with his daughter. He'd have to submit proof of completing courses, essentially admitting he was incompetent. Every decision he wanted to make for Lily would be scrutinized. His authority as a parent would be gone. Jessica, who had been his biggest cheerleader, had no real skin in the game. For her, this was a power struggle, a chance to win a victory over the ex-wife. She could egg him on, stoke his ego, and tell him they were right. But she wouldn't have to sit in that supervised room. Her name wouldn't be on the court order branding him a negligent parent. The turning point came a week before the hearing. Ms. Davies filed her final brief, which included a deposition from Lily's pediatric gastroenterologist. He was a leading expert in his field, and his testimony was devastating. He detailed the long-term damage untreated celiac disease can cause: malnutrition, osteoporosis, intestinal cancers. He stated, in no uncertain terms, that knowingly feeding a celiac child gluten was not just negligent, it was abusive. Mark's lawyer called him for an emergency meeting. I can only imagine how that conversation went. There was no more bluster, no more talk of anxious mothers. There was only the cold, hard evidence. "Mark, I have to be honest with you," his lawyer likely said. "Their case is airtight. They have medical experts, photographic evidence, and a documented history of your refusal to comply. Your girlfriend will be seen as a hostile and unreliable influence. When you get on that stand, her lawyer is going to take you apart. They'll ask you if you have a medical degree. They'll ask you why your opinion should matter more than a specialist's. You will not win this. And when you lose, you will lose badly. The choice was laid bare for him. He could go to court and be publicly and legally humiliated, branded an unfit father, and forced into a restrictive, shameful custody arrangement. His life, his weekends, and his relationship with his daughter would be dictated by a court order born from his own failure. Or, he could find another way out. That night, Mark called me. It was the first time I'd heard his voice without the familiar edge of anger. It was just, empty. "Sarah," he said, his voice hollow. I can't do this." "Can't do what, Mark?" "Can't go to court and tell the truth? I can't have some stranger watching me with my own daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't be treated like a criminal. This whole thing, it's too much. This is the situation you created." I shot back, "My patient's gone. All you had to do was keep her safe. That's all you ever had to do." There was a long, heavy silence. "I know," he whispered. And then he hung up. I didn't understand the finality in his tone. I thought it was a moment of reluctant surrender, a sign that he might finally be ready to accept the consequences. I was wrong. It wasn't surrender. It was a prelude to his disappearance. The morning of the court hearing, I woke up with a knot of anxiety and determination in my stomach. I dressed in a simple, dark gray suit Miss Davies had called my serious but sympathetic outfit. I kissed Lily's sleeping head, whispering, "This is for you, my love." My mother was staying with her, a calm port in my storm. Miss Davies and I sat on a hard wooden bench outside the courtroom, our files stacked neatly beside us. We were ready. We were prepared for the lies, the accusations, and the fight. We waited. 9 o'clock, the scheduled time, came and went. Then 9:15. Mark and Jessica were nowhere to be seen. Mark's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, paced the hallway, constantly checking his phone, his expensive suit looking rumpled and his face pale with stress. At 9:30, the bailiff opened the door. "The judge is ready for the Evans case." Mr. Harrison looked at us, his expression a mixture of panic and defeat. I can't reach my client. He's not answering his phone. His girlfriend isn't either." Miss Davies raised an eyebrow. "How convenient." We entered the solemn, wood-paneled courtroom. The judge, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes, looked down at us from her bench. Mr. Harrison explained the situation, and the judge's lips thinned in disapproval. She granted a 30-minute recess. We went back into the hallway to wait. The silence was deafening. There was no shouting match, no dramatic confrontation. There was just nothing. Just as the 30 minutes were up, Mr. Harrison's phone buzzed. He answered it, and his entire posture deflated. He listened for a moment, said, "I understand," and hung up. He walked over to us, his face ashen. "They're not coming," he said, his voice flat. He looked at Ms. Davies. "I just received an email from my client. It contains a signed and notarized document." He handed his phone to her. I leaned over her shoulder to read the email. My eyes scanned the formal legal text, but 3 words jumped out, searing themselves into my brain: relinquishment of parental rights. I couldn't breathe. Mark hadn't just failed to show up. He had detonated his life as a father. Rather than face the consequences of his actions, rather than attend a class, submit to supervision, or simply admit he was wrong, he had chosen to disappear. He had signed away his right to ever see Lily again. He had chosen his pride and his new girlfriend over his own daughter. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over me. There was the shocking, overwhelming relief. The fight was over. Lily was safe. I had won. But beneath that was a profound and bottomless sadness. A grief so deep it felt like a physical blow. This wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. My daughter had just been orphaned by a living father. Mr. Harrison formally presented the document to the judge. The case was dismissed. It was over in less than 5 minutes. Walking out of the courthouse and into the bright sunlight, I felt hollowed out. How would I ever explain this to Lily? That her daddy loved her, but not enough to keep her safe? That he left because he didn't want to follow a rule that protected her very life? The months that followed were quiet. Mark was true to his word. He vanished. His phone number was disconnected. His social media was deleted. He and Jessica moved out of their apartment and left town without a word. Slowly, a new normal began to bloom in the space his absence left behind. Our home, once a fortress against external threats, became simply a sanctuary. The constant anxiety that had been my shadow for so long began to recede. It was just me and Lily. And it was enough. A year later, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Lily and I were in the kitchen, our hands dusted with gluten-free flour. We were baking cupcakes, and she was meticulously placing sprinkles on top, her tongue stuck out in concentration. She was healthy, happy, and thriving. She looked up at me, a smear of chocolate on her cheek. "Mommy, I'm glad our food is safe now." I smiled, my heart aching and swelling at the same time. "Me too, sweet pea. Me too." I had gone to court seeking protection, and in the end, I got it, but not in the way I expected. I hadn't won a battle against Mark, I had won a future for Lily. A future where she would be unconditionally safe, cherished, and protected. I was her mother, her father, her guardian, and her champion. And as I watched her laugh, reaching for another cupcake, I knew with absolute certainty, we were going to be just fine.